B'timra tá sibh a chuirde. Sin bhhailtain seo a chur forainn fáilte romh ag an cid seo de Clark Avery RSC Canja. Ní féidir len sibh seo thuairt isteach ag RSC Canja, mar sin tá mo déine a chur Clark Avery RSC Canja thugamh ar na man socialta. How are you folks? Sienna Walsh here, manager of RSC Canja, and I am introducing this particular section of the winter programme. I hope you enjoy it. We can't bring you in here to enjoy the winter programme, so we're bringing the winter programme to you on social media.
My name is Currie and I'm the Heritage Officer at EastSide Partnership. It's a regeneration charity in East Belfast. But starting in April 2019, I coordinated a heritage project with 15 participants from the community called EastSide Lives. And the aim of this project was to train and support members of the public to research interesting people from the past and to use this information to create a heritage trail. And that we could walk around East Belfast and tell untold stories or unrepresented stories that hadn't been made public before. So each participant had their own research subject. Sometimes it was a relation, sometimes it was someone we'd heard a little bit about and we wanted to find out more about. And we had heard that Nellie Gordon was featured in the WRDA's excellent trail celebrating Belfast women, and we wanted to know a wee bit more about her. So Emily Lee had the task of finding out more about Nellie so that we could tell her story. So, Emily.
Hello. Well, I must say I've enjoyed this project very, very much. Some of our group had already chosen somebody they wanted. I had a couple of options, but somebody had already taken them. And then Lisa mentioned Nellie Gordon, and I liked the sound of her very much, a spokeswoman for women's rights. So researching her hidden life turned into a bit of a treasure hunt. I found nuggets of really good information, and I also ended up going down quite a lot of rabbit holes that had no end. The hardest bit of the research was finding when she was born and where she lived. I knew that Nellie was married and was from East Belfast, but I couldn't find her maiden name. Working backwards with the information I already had, I came across a birth certificate for a Sarah Jane Welland. Now, Sarah Jane Welland seemed to fit with all the other information I had, so I tried to follow her life using the census records, but she actually didn't seem to exist. I found her eventually, thanks to Lisa and the Public Records Office, who had corrected the original birth certificate that you see there many years later with a change of names from Sarah Jane Welland to Ellen Jane Whelan. Apparently the birth was registered by a neighbour who was present at the birth but who couldn't read or write and had signed the form with an X. Whelan had been recorded as Welland, and Sarah was actually Nellie's mother's name, so Sarah Jane Welland officially became Ellen Jane Whelan and known to all as Nellie. Nellie Gordon was a force to be reckoned with in the early 20th century. She was born in 1884 in Terence Street in the Short Strand area. You'll see it there on the map. There's a red X just up northeast from the Lagan near the chemical works. It's in the Short Strand area. She worked as a child in the textile mills and later became an outspoken trade union activist thanks to James Connolly, who described the Belfast mills as slaughterhouses for the women and penitentiaries for the children. The loud noise of the machines, coupled with the damp and the dust, made working life difficult for mill workers, and tuberculosis spread quickly. Nellie recalled how it was quite a common sight to see women from mills laid up and lying for months with what was called a decline, then dying quite young. In later years, she says, I have no doubt now that all these deaths were brought about by the bad conditions then prevailing in the mills. Describing her childhood days, she says, On our bare feet, we started at 6:30 a.m, worked until 8:15, then stopped for breakfast. We carried cans of tea from our homes, which in many cases were about 4 miles from where we worked. We had to walk, there were no trains, and we heated the cans in a hot water trough belonging to the spinning frames. Of course, we didn't realise how miserable our conditions were. This is the Owen Cork Mill in Beersbridge Road in East Belfast, one of the mills in which Nellie worked. I started work at 11 years old and worked for 3 days and went to school 3 days. One day was a big week, Monday, Wednesday and Friday. For that week we earned 3 shillings and 9pence, and on the wee week, Tuesday, Thursday and Saturday morning, we worked for 3 shillings. She explained it was necessary for us to start young as we were nimble with our fingers. Our dinner hour was from 1 till 1:45. The well-off ones could buy a halfpenny worth of broth or stew, and also a halfpenny worth of rice, a small bun at a halfpenny, and of course our own can of tea bought from home. But you know, that was our life, and we were young, and I suppose we were happy enough, until the agitation came along and that opened our eyes. In the summer of 1912 there were widespread riots in Belfast between Catholic and Protestant workers. According to Nellie's account of the time, Catholic workers were being chased from their employment daily, beaten, bruised and deprived of their livelihood. James Connolly, who had founded the Irish Textile Workers Union, arranged for every girl and woman to receive 5 shillings, naming this as victimisation pay. This was a godsend, as even if the women had been able to get back to work, they had to work a fortnight before any wages would be paid out to them. 1912 was also the year that the National Health Insurance came into operation, and all workers had to join a union. Nellie joined the newly formed Irish Women's Workers' Union, and it was James Connolly who took her details for her membership application. And that encounter would change her life. In her memoirs, Nellie remembers him saying to her, "It has struck me, Mrs. Gordon, that you seem to be an intelligent woman, and if I may say so, it is surprised that you never attempted to organise your mill workers." He pointed out the perils and pitfalls of an unorganised body and explained that the recent pogrom of rioting and expulsions would not have been possible if we had been organised. Nellie replied that, well, she had to agree, but she felt helpless to do anything about that. "It is a duty you owe your fellow workers," Connolly told her, and said, in his opinion, it was a scandal that Irish women would stand idly by and not take a stand. Nellie's response was to say, "But I know nothing about trades organisations." Connolly answered, "Isn't it obvious that somebody must make a start?" So she took up the challenge, gave up her job at the Owen Cork Mill on the Beersbridge Road, where she was stocking mistress, a fairly senior post in the mill, and then became a trade union worker. Her mill wages at that time were 17 shillings and 9pence. By August of the same year, 1912, she was working for the Irish Textile Workers Union, alongside the secretary, Winifred Currie, and Connolly. There was one snag: the job wasn't paid. However, Connolly gave her 5 shillings a week. "I nearly fell through the floor with shock," she says in her memoirs, because other members, including Winifred Currie, were volunteers. The union at that stage was helped financially by the Dockers section in Corporation Street, to whom Connolly had given a lot of help. Nellie's first speech was at a rally. Along with the Dockers band, Connolly and friends of the movement, they toured the city, and she was introduced to the crowd as the union's new organiser. She was called on to speak, much to her discomfort. "My God, would I ever forget that speech," she said. "My knees were shaking and I was trembling all over. The only subject I knew was to ridicule the bosses, which I did by punctuating my remarks by curses. The crowds gathered in thousands and they cheered me tremendously. The applause I got and the fun helped me regain my composure. The women workers knew me because I'd worked with them in various mills, so they kept me up by cheering, and they wanted to hear nobody but me. But I wasn't confident in myself. There weren't any films in those days to help us learn the ways of the outside world. We lived our own lives, working, dancing the night through, and singing our songs. As time went on and she did more public speaking, new friends encouraged her to read more, educate herself. Connolly bought her A Tale of Two Cities, and she said that she never forgot about the women knitting while their heads fell during the French Revolution. I even dreamed at night of those women with the long clothes like tea cosies, knitting this time on barges. A gift of a Webster's dictionary from a prominent businessman with offices in Fleet Street was a constant companion, and she used it when reading the newspapers that came into the union offices. She recalls Connolly with great affection, saying he had a great admiration for women who he never ceased to praise. He would narrate the oft-told story of the bravery of Irish women through the long ages and during the famine and land league days. He also admired the mill workers who were the breadwinners because they could always get work while their husbands couldn't. He even invited Maud Gonne and Countess Markovich to speak to the mill workers, but they were telling the girls all about different cultural activities they could take up, and really times were too hard for the girls to take that seriously. Nellie recalls that when she was called to speak, the girls stamped their feet and cheered the house down. She says, the Countess told Connolly that she would have liked to have been me in my shoes, as I had the power to make my audiences laugh and cry. In 1913, there was a large gathering on May Day at Custom House in Belfast. We had bands and banners and thousands of people following us, she recalls. They were on the cannons and on the sheds, while boys were up the lampstanders. Of course, we had large crowds of police as well. And just as I was mounting the platform, somebody whispered to me that such a big policeman was at my elbow and for me to watch what I was saying. Angrily, I said, well, I don't care a damn. And from then on, her core supporters, which included James Connolly, her future second husband, Jimmy Grimley, and Winifred Kearney, dubbed themselves the Don't Give a Damn League. Her confidence grew the more speeches she made, and she became a strong voice at public demonstrations, standing on platforms alongside the like of Keir Hardie. Connolly's Irish Republic leanings influenced her greatly, and she joined Cumann na Ban when it was established in April 1914, and her husband joined the volunteers in the fight for independence. After the uprising, and when Connolly was killed, Nellie's life changed. She remembers going with the widowed Mrs. Connolly to the Belfast Co-op for the quarterly dividend. The clerk gave her a form to bring to her husband to sign as he was the member. She stammered out the words, he is dead. The clerk got another form and asked, what did he die from? My heart, said Nellie, was sore for Mrs. Connolly, as she very bravely answered, gunshot wounds. The girl never batted an eyelid, but gave her the form to sign and handed over the dividend. Evidently the girl wasn't concerned as to how James Connolly received his gunshot wounds which brought him to his death. That is Nellie's words. Nellie and Jimmy's only child, a boy, was born a month after Connolly was killed, and the business of being a housewife and mother occupied her time. Mrs. Connolly and her family left Belfast for Dublin. Winifred Kearney had been deported and put in prison, though she and Nellie stayed in touch by letter. After the amnesty, Winnie was released, but had little interest in union affairs. They were lost without Connolly. So our Nellie, as we've begun to call her, grew up in the Belfast Mills, married her first husband, Joseph Gordon, in 1906 at St Matthew's on the Newton Road. She was 22. Joseph had chest problems and died 5 years later in the workhouse on the Lisburn Road. In 1915 she married Jimmy Grimley, the Irish Worker, the newspaper produced by James Larkin and later edited by James Connolly, announced the wedding under the headline, "A Gladder Note." At St Matthew's Church on Wednesday was celebrated the marriage of Nellie Gordon and Jimmy Grimley. Both are well known in the labour movement in Belfast, and in times of stress, especially during the Dublin lockout, stood boldly by the Irish Transport Union. Their many friends will join with us in wishing them all good luck. They had one child, we don't know his name, but it is understood he emigrated at some stage to America. Jimmy Grimley later became a Belfast City Councillor for the Smithfield ward, and he and Nellie ran a second-hand furniture shop off the Newton Ards Road before moving to Dublin because of the sectarian riots in Belfast in 1935. Nellie died in Dublin, aged 76, in 1960, about a year after the death of her husband. She wrote down her memories of her time with James Connolly so that, and I quote, "I could at least show a different side, a more human and jolly side of his character, to people who only know of Connolly as a bitter opponent of British rule, and also as one who is believed to have forced the rising. Be that as it may, we women workers of Belfast have many beautiful memories of him." She ends her story by saying, "I am immensely proud that I can look back at my association with Connolly and the many brilliant men and women I have met through him. I owe his memory a lot."
So as Emily has shared Nellie's story and her experiences of researching this remarkable woman, I wanted to talk a little bit about the legacy of Nellie Gordon in East Belfast. As she features in our Eastside Lives trail, her life and the lives of others featured helped us to reinterpret the landscape. She did this in two ways. The first way is in how we see the physical landscape of East Belfast, and the second is in the stories we tell about it. Researching Nellie helps us to reimagine the landscape from the past in new ways, so we can make informed decisions about what's valuable to remember and to preserve as the landscape changes. It's also given us an opportunity to tell some types of stories that aren't frequently told in East Belfast: socialist stories, women's stories, and to platform authentic working class voices from the past. For all of the people on our trail, we asked ourselves, do we have the right to tell their stories? Do they have a true connection with East Belfast? And if they did, where would be a good, authentic place to tell their story on our trail? So to get started, let's look at Nellie's connections with East Belfast. I love a historic map, so we're going to have lots of historic maps here, thanks to Prony's Historic Map Viewer. The evidence that we have from birth and marriage certificates, street directories, and the 1911 census, it appears that a lot of Nellie's early life in Belfast took place within a few streets. Terence Street, where she was born, is marked with the red X on this map. Terence Street was a tiny street. We just found it on a street directory, never marked on a map. And it seemed to only have two houses on it at the most. But that's Quinn Street there, and Terence Street runs off Quinn Street. So we've marked it with a red X there. After her first husband died, we found her again in 1911 on the census, and she had moved back in with her father in Kilmood Street, and it's just in the centre of the map there with the green X. So Emily and I, just in the last week, were following up some more leads and discovered that there was a good chance that when Nellie married James Grimley, they had their first shop on the Woodstock Road. It's on the map there near the bottom with a blue X. You see, there's not a mad amount of distance between any of these places. Like, they're all within about a mile of each other maximum. So we think it is the same people, and if it is, it seems that they had a shop there and their stock might have been damaged in malicious attacks. There's a wee article about it there from the newspaper that was in the Northern Whig in 1922. This says, James Grimley has put a request for compensation in because his shop was destroyed on the Woodstock Road as a result of 4 attacks. So we have a feeling that this might be the same place or the same people. James and Nellie don't appear in Bridgend, where we know they are later, at the same time as their shop on the Woodstock Road. So it seems that they might have moved from the Woodstock to Bridgend quite soon after these attacks happened, and who would blame them? So we've got, when they moved their shop on the Bridgend, we've got a wee picture of that too. There we go. Now this is a little bit after. This is in 1945, about 10 years after they moved to Dublin. But I doubt that the street would have changed very much in that amount of time. Their shop would have been just in that block behind the bridge. You can just see in the background. This is what that place looks like now. So it's changed a massive amount. It's a shatter zone of a neighbourhood carved up to make way for cars and to enforce segregation. And several of the stories that we explored in our Eastside Lives trail had connections with this neighbourhood. One person had lived in Memel Street, just right beside here. Another was in Harlan Street, another in Lisbon Street, all within very short walking distance. And we wanted to put a piece of art for our trail in this place, just to try and encourage people to move across these perceived boundaries between Titanic Quarter and Short Strand, City Centre and Newton Arch Road. But it proved almost impossible to find an appropriate wall to put the art on, and just because of how the area is being developed. There's not many walls standing still, and the ones that are might not be standing for much longer as the Sirocco site is being redeveloped. But we did manage to get one on the City East building that's quite close by. You can almost see it in the background of this picture. Telling the story of Jane Scott, who had lived in Memel Street for a while. But here we've got, you see Sirocco on the side, and kind of left us asking, are there going to be any stories told of the past in Sirocco site when it's redeveloped for the future, and if there are going to be, what will they be? So we decided to tell Nellie's story within the view of owner Cork Mill, where she had worked. This wasn't only due to find it difficult to tell the story in Bridgend just because of the fragmented nature of that neighbourhood, but because once we started to explore Mrs. Grimley's story further, it became apparent that she moved around East Belfast much more than we had first suspected. As Emily had already explained, Nellie had worked in the mill and would have likely travelled there by foot every day from her home in Terence Street, carrying her can of tea. This would have been about 1.5 miles for her. So I've marked that on the map here too with the 2 red X's. The red X that's close to the top left hand would have been her home in Terence Street, and the one that's closer to the bottom right is where owner Cork Mill is and still standing to this day. So there's a good amount of logic to root the story of her achievements near the place where she was working when she first met Connolly. And through her memoirs we can trace her movements around Belfast, York Street, Falls Road, and then she goes on out to Dublin and Cork. However, the location that stood out to me the most was a throwaway line where she describes Connolly bringing her to a lecture by Alice Milligan in an old loft in Conswater Street about the values of travel. And it's marked Conswater Street in the top right hand corner there with the blue X. So the reason that one stands out for me is this. Oh, wrong slide. Here we go. There we go. This is my office. And it backs onto Conswater Street. So this is where the participants of our project met regularly. And we've heard, since starting this project, we've also heard rumours that suffragettes might have met here, in Conswater Street, perhaps in the same attic where Nellie Gordon had gone to listen to her lecture. So I like to feel that we're carrying on some revolutionary legacy by helping people widen their horizons and pushing for societal change that benefits everyone. As I mentioned, telling Nellie Gordon's story also gave us an opportunity to diversify the types of stories that are told in East Belfast. There are few social stories publicly told in the East, although there has been a rich tradition of socialism, trade unionism and even communist history in the area. This narrative has not been explicit in recent years, and with the evidence of some memorialisation being removed, a commemoration to William Tomlinson, a soldier with the International Brigade in the Spanish Civil War, was removed quietly from its place in Thorndyke Street. Many of the stories that are told in East Belfast too are quite masculine. Predominant narratives focus on the men who built the ships, fought in the war and owned the big houses. So this is an image of a mural on the side of the visitor centre that we've just seen a picture of. It features 12 men and just 2 women. The women are writers Mary Jones and Lucy Caldwell. And there are other female figures portrayed in street art, but they tend to be figurative and represent the every woman rather than telling the story of a particular person. So I think by including Nellie and the other women featured in our trail, we were able to increase the level of real women's stories being told in the public realm. Finally, what I have personally found to be a joy by including Nellie in our project was that she was unapologetically working class. Her memoirs were handwritten on the back of a ledger book, and in it she talks about money and not having enough of it, and feeling out of her comfort zone when she didn't know the right words or the right books or the right people. And she felt out of her depth and an imposter, but yet she did it all anyway. And I feel that on its own is an incredible legacy to leave behind and an important thing to pass on to other working class girls. So if you've enjoyed hearing about our project and would be interested in learning some more about the interesting people celebrated in our Eastside Lives Trail, we would love it if you came and visited. And you can pick up a paper trail at Eastside Visitor Centre or download the PDF or audio version from visiteastside.com. And we just want to thank you for listening, and we hope that you've enjoyed what we found out about Nellie.